Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. It's March 2nd. It is approximately 8:30 a.m., and I want to talk to you about a serious series of issues, talking about vaccine mandates, talking about monkeypox and bird flu, things that are affecting you both today and long term, the consequences of what has happened. Now, we must mention, first of all, that we are not doctors, we're not scientists, so we're not providing any medical advice or anything of that nature, but we can read, just like you can. And we believe that these are issues that need to be discussed. We hope you will join us for that discussion. Now, if it is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we want to welcome you and thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary on the channel. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on social media to hear your voices, to get your chats, your tweets, your phone calls from anywhere in the world to talk about what you believe is important and affecting us all. Because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in your right to free speech. It's not just an American principle. You deserve to be able to have your voices heard about the issues you think are important. And every Sunday, we look forward to hearing you do that at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So let's get to the heart of the issue and what's going on. Now, obviously, in 2020, the world changed, irrevocably changed. As much as we have been told we're trying to return to normal, that will never be possible. The consequences of what has been done will continue to affect us going forward for decades at the least. But the thing that made us decide to talk about this today, besides the fact that the mainstream news media is largely overlooking these issues, is that we need to have this conversation. We saw this article. This came out and was published on February 28th, 2 days ago, that New York State has decided that they are going to fight a ruling from Supreme Court Judge Gerald Neri out of Syracuse that removed the ability of New York State to mandate experimental vaccinations of individuals in the healthcare industry. Apparently, Governor Kathy Hochul believes that it is absolutely essential at this time to continue to mandate individual healthcare choices for citizens of the United States. This is troubling to us, and we disagree with it. It's something that we have always disagreed with on this channel. You have a right to make your choices for your health care. It is a right embedded in the Constitution. But some agents of the government, like Governor Kathy Hochul, like Greg Newsom out of California, like Joe Biden, have decided that they, as representatives of the government, have the ability to choose your health care, that the government is more important than you. And that discussion between you and your health care, your doctor, your nurses, whomever, is not as important as their mandate, their overriding decision. They can micromanage your health care. We disagree with this. We think this is insane. That being said, what is the impact? We already know that New York State in 2021 they fired 34,000 doctors and nurses and healthcare workers, which have negatively impacted the quality of health and life of people in New York State. This is something that we saw happen in California, in Michigan, Pennsylvania, many of the bluer than blue states throughout this nation. And it has a negative impact that is continuing to harm people to this day. That is a fact. It is not disputable. We don't have enough doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers because the government removed them from their duty and their work, and people are being harmed by that. But it's even more confusing, the actions of Governor Hochul, when we consider that also, just recently in the news, not widely spoken about, is the fact that, as an example, Columbia University has ended its COVID-19 mandates, that New York City is ending its COVID-19 mandates. This is interesting, especially for New York City, which lost a lawsuit and was forced to rehire many of the city workers that were fired for not allowing the government to dictate their health choices. New York City was wrong and was forced to rehire and back pay the individuals that they removed because they wouldn't obey the government deciding their healthcare choices. So that's important. The state is doing something that the city has already found to be illegal, even when a judge has said it's unconstitutional. But the state, Governor Kathy Hochul, wants to maintain this power over the people, this power to choose. We have to ask the question, why is that the case? Why are they doing this? What is the impact of this? And this is a tough subject because for a long time, and even to an extent today, we can't really speak about this. You may recall back in 2020, we were told, and the world was told, you can't have an opinion on this. You must accept the approved messaging that was being given by the government. Lo and behold, many of the people in 2020, 2021, many people had a belief that the pandemic was a result of scientific experiments in Wuhan, China. And lo and behold, we now know today, as reported on the 26th of February from Representative Mike McCall out of Texas in the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Department of Energy, we are correct that it appears that the entire COVID-19 epidemic was caused by a lab leak. This was a man-made virus that was leaked to the public and therefore created the pandemic the world has had to deal with. That this was artificial in its nature and not a naturally existing virus that just happened to take place at the same time that a virology lab was genetically manipulating viruses. This isn't new news, but it's amazing that we see again that the public was punished. Websites were removed. We saw many channels and individuals being able to reach out on social media were silenced and ostracized and punished and ridiculed by various levels of government for daring to say things that today we find are absolutely true. That's insulting. It's aggravating. And we keep being told that these vaccines that New York State is fighting to make sure they can mandate, that they have a control over, these experimental drugs. Let's be very clear. These are experimental drugs. They have not gone through the FDA process for human trials. They were fast-tracked in a speed that has never been seen before. Not even AIDS drugs from the 1980s and 1990s, they didn't even go through this kind of speedy process to reach the public. And this was done on a worldwide basis. We are now seeing that there are some potential problems with this, that there are issues, that these experimental drugs may have side effects. As reported by the CDC and the FDA, there are potential side effects that may include strokes. This is important. Need to know this. Think about this. That this vaccine that has been mandated by New York State, that New York State, Governor Hochul, Greg Newsom, many others, they're trying to continue to force American citizens to take something that they may or may not want, that their doctors may or may not approve for them, and it may have negative side effects, which could include strokes, according to the CDC and the FDA. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not trying to give you medical advice. I am making you aware that the side effects of this experimental drug are coming out, and we're learning more and more that there are problems. Yet at the same time, we have individuals that are telling us this is perfectly safe, and the very same FDA and CDC are telling us that we can use these very same drugs, these very same medications and vaccines on children 6 years of age and older. Think about that. This is from the American Medical Association, and it was reported 2 months ago in December of 2022 that they were all for the CDC and the FDA injecting these experimental drugs into children of 6 months of age. We see that the government is trying to mandate individual health care at the same time that we are seeing courts say that they can't do this, that this is a fundamentally unconstitutional action. This is something that we have seen in many court cases that have gone against the government, saying you can't do this, and there are consequences legally to them, not to even consider the potential health care issues that are also accounted with this. But remember, it was not that long ago, in fact, February 19th of 2021, where Joe Biden was talking to the American people and stating that the vaccines are safe. To quote France 24, the vaccines are safe. Please, for yourself, your family, your community, this country, take the vaccine when it's your turn and it's available. That's how we beat the pandemic. These were Joe Biden's words speaking to Americans from Michigan. He stated that it takes more time to check for safety than it does to make the vaccine. That's how fastidious they are. If there's one message to cut through everyone in the country, it's this: vaccines are safe. That's what Joe Biden said on February 19th of 2021. The CDC made their statement on January 13th of 2023. And we are seeing more and more effects. It's interesting that we're being told two different things, both over time and also at the same time. Again, we're seeing many institutions and various local governments are saying, we are going to end the vaccine mandates, we're going to end the protocols of the pandemic, but yet we are seeing other parts of the government continue to say that everything's fine, everything is safe, believe us, trust us, and we have control over your individual life. It doesn't make sense that the government is saying, oh, we can give this to children as well as adults, and you must have this as part of their health care. It is a requirement to go to school, to go to colleges, just part of their routine immunizations. But at the same time, we're seeing that there are problems coming directly from this that are long-term issues that we don't have answers for. We don't know what the ultimate result is. The confusion is so extreme that we can see, even as reported recently by Defense One, that the Department of Defense has changed its position. Again, another part of the government. On February 24th, the Department of Defense issued a guidance for removing the pandemic vaccinations that they started implementing in 2021. Quote, this guidance, required by Section 525 of the James M. Inhofe National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2023, directs the DoD component heads to formally rescind any policies, directives, and guidance implementing those vaccination mandates as soon as possible if they have not already done so. They're saying that they have to stop requiring members of the United States military from receiving the vaccination. That the mandate in the military has been removed. And already the Army, United States Army, has already gone about removing the mandate. It is no longer in effect. So our government, for our military, is saying it's not necessary to have these mandates. We are seeing that there are questions about the medication and its consequences. Something that flies in the face of what we were told by Joe Biden, that it was completely safe, that there was no problem whatsoever. And yet we still see individuals like Governor Kathy Hochul saying, but you are required to do this. This is still a mandate. The government still has more control over your life than you do. This is very troubling to us. In fact, we saw something that we thought was very important, and a question that we've heard, and I'm sure you've had, or you may have heard, or may have had yourself, from WJNO News Radio on the Brian Mudd program. On February 28th, he took a question about the side effects of the vaccinations. That is anyone going to be held responsible? Will anyone be accountable for forcing American citizens to do something they may not have wanted and have had a negative consequence from? Whether it could be the potential of strokes or sudden death or anything else that seem to be more and more likely to be consequences. At least for some individuals. Not to say it's for everyone, but at least for some individuals. And the answer is no. There is no one that will be held accountable, apparently. Legally, manufacturers, and again, quoting from Brian Mudd, manufacturers could be held liable for negative side effects if there was evidence of willful conduct by the manufacturer. Basically, that would mean that they have had to have known of potentially negative consequences of administering the vaccines that they deliberately covered up. There is no evidence of that. And the government, in their mandates from Joe Biden, removed any of their consequences. The government signed a waiver knowing that the side effects were unknown, and they decided to enforce those mandates even with unknown side effects. Manufacturers of these medications cannot be sued for that unless someone can prove that they didn't know. But even as we saw in Europe, Pfizer was mentioning that they knew that the vaccine would not prevent transmission of the virus. They knew that. But governments like Joe Biden did say to the public that it would end any and all transmission. That's an error of Joe Biden, not the manufacturer. So again, that's not willful misconduct. It's the government that lied to you about that. That was Joe Biden who misstated that fact. But it's also interesting, and I go on with WJNO's conversation about this. Brian Mudd mentioned, and you referenced in what I called the pandemic vaccine bombshell, data from Florida's vaccine adverse event reporting system has shown that the pandemic vaccines during the first 2 years of use have seen 425% less safe than your average other vaccination of any kind in causing adverse medical reactions and a staggering 1,100% less safe than average other vaccine in causing life-threatening reactions in Floridians who've received them. That is not to say that reactions to medication, vaccines, is rare. It seems to be rare. That is correct. But it also seems to be something that is, in fact, happening. People are having side effects, which is not uncommon. Most medications, most vaccinations do have a portion of the public, often a minority, that have an adverse reaction. The thing is, we don't know what those adverse reactions are going to be, or how many people are affected by it, or what are the conditions that cause that adverse reaction. Because this is an experimental drug that has been introduced en masse to the public. And so we are learning as we go, because it has not gone through the proper or the normal FDA process for human use. But you would say, well, since it is having this much of an impact, as in Florida's case, and we are seeing these questions being raised by the CDC and the FDA, well then someone obviously is liable, and therefore we could sue them for these adverse reactions. Is that a possibility? Well, the answer is no, because everyone vaccinated for the pandemic signs an immunization consent form. The questionnaire includes 14 personal health-related questions, along with 7-paragraph consent form. Obviously, this is the form in Florida, but in New York State, in California, in Michigan, Pennsylvania, in states across the nation, it is common that you are signing a consent form, that you waive your right to sue for any adverse impact. So no one is being held accountable. That's upsetting. And that should upset people, that any form of recourse to the public have been removed. We were forced to take these jabs. We were told incorrectly that there would be no impact to us and that we would be protected at levels that we have now seen are not true and not correct. And yet, even as city after city, even in some cases state after state, we are seeing that the actions that have been used by the government since 2020 are absolutely unconstitutional. We have governments and individuals in the government continuing to force us to take actions that we don't want to have. It's mind-boggling that there is this dichotomy, that at one end we are seeing even the military are removing mandates that are stopping this requirement, and at the other end we have individuals who are seeking more power to continue these mandates, to continue to impose their right as a member of government over the people. Now you may say to yourself, well, why is that the case? And again, we have not said that you should or should not receive a vaccination. That is a choice between you and your doctor. We are not doctors. We are not giving medical advice. We are not scientists. But we are looking at the credible news being reported by the United States government, by the CDC, the FDA, and several judges, and looking at what is the news. So you get to make your own choice. Remember, people were being demonized for this. When there were protests that we covered in 2021 of people saying they don't want the government to micromanage their life, those individuals were ostracized. In New York State, 34,000 doctors and nurses were fired because they didn't believe in violating their Hippocratic oath in their opinion, and that the government was overreaching its bounds. Channels were removed. People were silenced. This channel, at least once, maybe twice, we were given content strikes for daring to even mention this content and even questioning any aspect that the government had mandated and approved, any messaging that was approved by the government. Why is this happening? Well, we believe that this is because of power, that individuals in various levels of our government are using these mandates, one, to receive federal funding. It's a matter of getting additional monies into the states. And when we're talking about New York State, we're talking about California and many other states. New York State is losing billions of dollars a year. New York State is not solvent. New York State absolutely requires additional funding from the federal government for it to be able to operate, because its own operations, the budget of New York State, is absolutely red. It is negative. New York State is fiscally unsound, in part because of the policies of Governor Kathy Hochul, and before her, the disgraced former Governor Andrew Cuomo. So New York State has a vested interest in receiving additional federal funding, which comes along with the mandated vaccinations. In addition, it provides power to the government of New York State, both directly in being able to control the lives of individuals and at the same time to punish individuals like this channel or any other social media that may be out there where someone questions the actions of the government. And since it is not approved messaging, we see Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Google will punish these individuals by ostracizing them, by deleting their channels, by removing their content and their statements. That gives a lot of political power. It is a way to suppress conversations. It is a way to suppress free speech. It is a way to be authoritarian. Kathy Hochul is acting more like an empress than she is as a governor of someone who is trying to oversee in the best manner possible, to the benefit of the most people possible, the government. If it weren't the case, then she wouldn't be fighting the Supreme Court in its decision, the New York State Supreme Court, in its decision to remove her power, to remove her mandate, even as cities within New York are removing these mandates, as institutions are removing these mandates, as the federal government, the military, is removing these mandates. There is another component to this, though, and we believe that's fear. Fear is a motivating factor. When the public is terrified, they will do anything to be safe. They will make the demand of the government, as we have often quoted here, of do something. That will be the cry from the public, whether that's in the United States or around the world. The public, afraid of something they have no control over, will demand of their elected officials, do something. And very often, as we have seen, whether it's the Patriot Act or vaccine mandates, lockdowns, we have seen that the government will abuse its power and will go out and take extreme actions that would never otherwise be accepted or allowed, because fear is motivating. Now, mind you, it doesn't mean that anything that is being done is effective. When politicians do something, that doesn't mean they've been effective in what they have done. As I stated, we will see them overreach. We've seen that in red flag laws, in terms of gun control. We have seen that in the Patriot Act, in spying on American citizens. We've seen that in many aspects of our lives. And each and every time when the public is reacting emotionally and is unstable because of their fear, the government overwhelmingly will abuse that moment and take more power than they have ever been able to take before. We see that in the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Canada, Mexico, name the nation. That is always the case, whether they're democratic nations, socialist nations, or outright communists. And we've seen that kind of fear continue to be used. It has now come to the point where we see this being used on a regular basis, such as the monkeypox, which has now been renamed the Mpox, because monkeypox is somehow now considered to be racist, sexist. It's I don't know what the reason is. It was the name since 1974 of this disease, and today, in modern sensibilities, it is somehow inoffensive, which does not change the medical impact of this. It is a disease found primarily in Central Africa, Eastern and Central Africa, that has occasionally had outbreaks around the world. That is not unusual. It's happened in the United States several times, as well as in Europe and the rest of the world. Those outbreaks are usually very limited. I believe the largest outbreak had 34 Americans die at its worst. The most recent was an outbreak that resulted in 23 people dying. And what we see is that it is now no longer a factor. According to CNN News, in their reporting on January 31st of 2023, monkeypox is almost gone in the United States, leaving lessons and mysteries in its wake. The article is by Brenda Goodman. And in that article, she mentions that the United States has gone from an outbreak in 2022 of approximately 450 cases a day at its peak to roughly single-digit cases today in 2023. That this has been relatively resolved. Now, why was this being transmitted? How was it being, the monkeypox, how was this infecting American citizens? Because of sexual transmission. The number one reason why it was affecting so many people. Sadly, it also affected children, but it was being primarily transmitted sexually. It was primarily transmitted by gay men, something that most news media had a great deal of difficulty admitting, and often stated, as you see here, early on, after the CDC identified men who have sex with men, that would be gay men, perhaps gay and bisexual men, as being the highest risk of infection. Officials warned of close contact, the kind that often happens with sexual activity. So if you had close, intimate contact, you had a high risk of transmission. They also noted, and going on to continue to quote CNN, they also noted that people could be infected through contact with contaminated surfaces like sheets or towels, which was incredibly low risk comparatively. This was primarily transmitted across the world by sex. And as people became more aware, when more and more of the LGBTQAI plus alphabet, add whatever you want, toaster community was being made aware of this, well, then people started taking precautions more often than not. Individuals stopped having random, unprotected sex. The number one precaution to protect yourself from monkeypox in 2022 was to not have unprotected, random sex, especially if you happen to be a gay man or a bisexual man. That was the best way to take care of it. But it isn't over, it appears, because at this time, nearly 40% of monkeypox cases in the United States were diagnosed in people who had HIV. And so those who have HIV are of extreme risk. And looking at the news as of February 21st, 2023, as reported by The Guardian, there is a horrific form of monkeypox that is found to affect people with advanced HIV. And it has a roughly 15% morbidity rate, or it is deadly in 15% of those cases, which is far higher than monkeypox found in the general public. Now, why do we bring that up? Well, in the same way that you could not speak about the pandemic and would be punished for saying that, we were punished, and many channels were punished, and had great difficulty in being able to speak about monkeypox. It was incredibly difficult to talk about monkeypox or even bird flu, and we'll get into that in 1 second. But we were told you can't refer to this as something that affects the gay population, even though the highest level of transmission was amongst gay men and bisexual men, in particular gay men, as reported by the CDC, as reported by the WHO, as reported by medical institutions around the world. But we were punished, and you were punished for mentioning that key factor, and to say that the best way to protect yourself wasn't by an injection, not by another vaccination, but by primarily restricting random, unprotected gay sex. I don't understand why this is such a bad thing. But remember, at the time, monkeypox was being touted as one of a near endemic, and that the extreme fear was being promoted at the time, that this was going to be the next pandemic, that this would affect everyone in the world, that this was something that everyone should be terrified of. At least that was the messaging coming from the approved sources, MSNBC, CNN, the White House, and many other sources. It wasn't just be aware, it was to be afraid and to seek out even more vaccinations so that you could be protected, so that the government would be able to control your lifestyle. Again, we're not telling you whether you should or should not get a vaccination. That is a decision for you and your doctor to make based on your individual health needs. If you are at risk, it may be of interest to you. That's for you to decide. We're not going over that. What we are looking at is how the political ramifications have had an impact on our rights and our freedoms and our choices. And we are not being given full indication. The pandemic, the monkeypox endemic, the surge of monkeypox cases, which has happened repeatedly since 1974 around the world. This was not new. This was not shockingly different than any other outbreak that we have seen in the past. But it was promoted as if it could be life-threatening. And the government used that ability to oppress the public, to silence free speech, to be able to force people to do things that they may not have otherwise wanted to do if they were to rationally think through their risk profiles. I think that's an important recurring part of this conversation. The government is overreaching, and they are forcing people to take actions they may not otherwise ever take, which would be a form of coercion, as well as unconstitutional. And the impact is negative because of the fear that was being put on this, because of the way people were being demonized for having the monkeypox or being potentially capable of transmitting the monkeypox. We saw that the LGBTQAI+, you may want to be a toaster, whatever it is, that community was under more of a microscope, of a detrimental point of view. They were considered, again, verboten and to be separated from the rest of the public, which is diametrically opposed to the diversity requirements of the Biden-Harris administration and being promoted by progressive media throughout this nation. They were effectively increasing the amount of negative reflection, negative outlook, at the same time that they're saying people should be inclusive. And that kind of brings us to the bird flu, something that we have been talking about on this channel for quite some time. It was approximately 2 years ago, February 21st of 2021, when we first talked about the avian flu, the N5H8 virus, one of the forms of the avian flu, something that has been responsible for over 50 million chickens and ducks and turkeys and various birds being destroyed, for our consumption, as well as untold numbers of wild birds in nature. And it was in February of 2021 that we were told that the N5H8 virus was now transmittable to human beings. And the first reported case was coming out of Russia, something that was overlooked by the mainstream media and downplayed. But the bird virus continued to expand, and it has continued to affect poultry throughout the world as well as wild birds. And we followed this up a little bit later when we had our conversation, and this was on May 15th of 2022, that the outbreak was continuing to expand, and it was apparently affecting even more people around the world. Given that there has been so much fear, we were informing the public of something that they weren't necessarily aware of so that they could take greater precaution, so that they could be aware and protect themselves in whatever manner they felt was most effective in consultation with their doctors and with scientists, in some cases, their work environments. Because information, not fear, is one of the most effective ways for people to deal with crises. At least that's what we believe. But the situation has continued to advance, and there are even more problems. We now see, according to the CDC and other major news media, that the bird flu, and there are various types of bird flu, the H3, H5, H6, H7, H9, and H10 viruses all exist. We have seen that there is an H5 variant, the H5N1 variant, that is now affecting individuals in the United States. And we believe that the first person in the United States, April 28th of 2022, was the first case of a person in America having the avian bird flu, or the H5N1 virus. We are told that today the risk is low, that this is not a major concern, and that people shouldn't be worried about it, but should take appropriate precautions. And today we are now being told, March 1st, 2023, that China is now reporting its first case of the H5N1 bird flu. That a 53-year-old woman in China, according to WHO, has been infected with this bird flu. The concern here is not to be fearful. In fact, given what we have seen with the monkeypox, given what we have seen with the pandemic and the vaccinations, we are trying to prevent both the fear-mongering that leads to do something mentality that enables the government to overreach its power and to micromanage individuals' lives and healthcare, and to negatively impact our businesses as well as our healthcare with doctors and nurses. We're trying to be ahead of that. The bird flu there have been several variants of it that are affecting humans. At this time, it has been a significantly small number of individuals who have been affected. It is unlikely to be able to affect large swaths of the population, but that is not impossible. The bird flu, this current variant, has had international impact. It is affecting food and poultry around the world, but it is also transmittable, especially as homesteading has become so popular in recent years as the price of food has expanded, especially because of the current ongoing food crisis, the 30% less food in the world. More people have gone to their backyards to raise chickens, to grow their own crops, and therefore the bird flu is even more potentially transmissible to human beings, especially as we are seeing the H5N1 and H5N8 variants affect human beings. So we offer this as not a doctor, not as a scientist, but as a common sense or real world precaution. We call it a public service announcement. To be aware of this and to take greater precautions, especially if you have homesteading, especially if you work with poultry and have greater exposure. But we shouldn't be fearful, and we should not allow the mainstream media to take the opportunity to one day make an announcement and suddenly put fear into people's minds like we saw with the monkeypox, using the backdrop of the pandemic as a reason to scare people into compliance or to allow the government to overreach its power. It would not be surprising to see that New York State or California, Michigan, or any of the bluer than blue states to suddenly come out and say that the government now has control of your property, of your livestock, ostracizing you from the rest of the public because you may have chickens in your backyard, because you may have birds as pets, and therefore you must suffer the overreach of government. Or worse yet, that social media will prevent individuals like myself and others to even speak about this, to give people the option or the awareness to protect themselves. We do not recommend anyone be terrified of the pandemic, monkeypox, or the bird flu. We do recommend that you should always be in contact with your healthcare provider, whether it's a doctor, a nurse, or whomever you trust, to speak about these issues and to be aware of how to protect yourself in the best way possible, whether that is or is not a vaccination or any other medical procedure that is approved by your doctor. We're not scientists, and we're not telling you that these things will mutate or transmit into some other form. We're not trying to fearmonger. We are talking about awareness. And when you lack that awareness, then fear will take hold, and we have seen that that fear will be abused by social media, by the mainstream news media, and various government entities. And that is never in the best interest of the public. We hope you found this to be informative. We hope that this will allow you to be aware of the issues that affect us today and how this is being used against you politically in various aspects. We look forward to hearing your questions about this. We look forward to hearing what you think about this. And we hope that you will join us Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to talk more about this and other issues affecting us all.